Greetings, one and all, and welcome to the second edition of the one-on-one interviews here on the Dinner Club. I am pleased and proud to have my long-term associate here on YouTube, Zaunstar. Zaunstar, how are you?
Greetings. I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you very much for the invite. Always happy to chat with you and see how things are going.
Oh, I'm grateful that we could make the same time, and and so soon. It's really cool. Anyway, so I've got, as I've said to everybody, well, I've said to Raven so far, and I will say to everybody, I've got the same set of questions that I'm going to ask everybody, and then specific questions for each individual. Anyway, so I've got, as I've said to everybody, well, I've said to Raven so far, and I will say to everybody, I've got the same set of questions that I'm going to ask everybody, and then specific questions for each. Anyway, so I've got, as I've said to everybody, well, I've Raven so far, and I will say to everybody, same set of questions that I'm going to ask everybody, and then specific questions.
I think it's on your side. I'm pretty sure.
Let me try.
Yeah, there you go. You just turned it off. Whatever it was.
I don't know what to do here. Hang
on.
on.
Your side. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Good. I don't hear you anymore. I don't hear anything.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to take turns muting each other. You know, when I'm done talking, I'll mute myself, and then you can mute yourself while you're not talking.
Gotcha. I'll do that. Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to take turns muting each other.
Do that.
When I'm done talking, I'll mute myself, and then you can mute yourself while you're not talking.
Gotcha. I'll do that. Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to take turns muting. All right. Okay. So I think that this is like science fiction.
I'll do that. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Okay. You can hear me, right? Okay. Good. All right. So I'm gonna turn the volume way down and also put it on mute. All right. I'm going back. You say something now.
Hello. Okay, I'm gonna start off with the questions and see what happens. Okay, first of all, like I say, it starts off fairly banal. Where were you born, and who was president when you were born?
Gotcha. Well, I was born in Auburn, New York. Good old upstate New York. Basically, the biggest city between. Is it still? Is it still? Is this? Are you still hearing echoes? What? I can put my headphones on if you think that'll help, but I don't think that's it because. All right, I'll try it. Okay. Is that any better? Yeah, YouTube is not open. My YouTube's not open at all. So
okay, let's see how this goes. Okay, so let's try this. Take it from the top. Where were you born, and who was president?
Okay, so the person who was president. Just make sure. Is this working now? By the way, it's not coming from my end. I guarantee it. I got my headphones on. There's no way it can be from my end. So something is. Something's coming up from your end. It has to be. I don't have YouTube. YouTube's not up at all on my end. A bit. Literally, the only window I have open is this window.
I think I fixed it.
You did? Okay. What was wrong?
I didn't even know that I had the video tab open in a completely different tab. Like I
Right.
wasn't messing around in this tab at all. So yeah, I had no idea. Man, I feel like a reject. Anyway, yeah. So there you go.
It's all right. Is it
So
okay
sorry
now?
about that. Yeah. So go ahead and try to answer that question like, for the third time.
Okay. All right. I'll try again. So, I was born in the very small city of Auburn, New York. It's in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. It's basically the biggest city between Rochester and Syracuse, which isn't really saying very much, but you know, it's there, whatever. The And I was born during the Nixon administration, in the waning months of the Nixon administration. So yeah, so it was quite a while ago,
And
and
did you move around a lot when you were a kid?
nope, didn't move around much at all. I lived in the same house that I grew up in from zero to after I finished college, and then once I finished my master's, I moved down to the DC area where I still am today. I'm in the Northern Virginia suburbs of DC.
Right on. Wow. When you were a kid, did you like school?
I did. I liked school for the most part. I liked elementary school for the most part, and middle school I got bullied quite a bit. But once I moved to a different high school, I went to the high school where my dad was a teacher, and he was pretty well liked, and I got along a lot better in that high school. It was a larger school. The weird thing is about places like upstate New York. It's like you got these little districts which are very rural, and it's sort of it didn't really suit me very well. Like being smart in a place like that is not socially. It's not a good thing socially to be
I
one of
can
the
relate to
smarter
that.
kids. So being in the bigger school, there were a lot more people who were like college prep and all that sort of thing, and so I fit in a lot better in that environment.
Yeah, sure, sure. So when you say you did like school, was it more the academic side, or did you also get on pretty well with the social side of school?
So the academic side, I always did quite well, and the social side was a little bit hit or miss. Part of So in high school, like I had a lot of friends, and I did have quite a lot. It wasn't like I was one of the popular kids or anything like that, but I got along just fine, and I had quite a few friends, and it was all good. Um, there wasn't really any dating going on in high school, mostly because I looked very very young back then, and so I never really felt very confident in seeing if I could date anyone. There was like kind of a couple almosts, but not just never really happened. So that all of that waited until college.
Right, right. And when you were in high school though, or younger than that, did you have a favorite teacher?
I did have a lot of teachers that I really liked. I had some really good English teachers. Mr. Wilson, my 10th grade teacher, was really good. Um,
But wait a
even
minute. Well, for you, what made a teacher a good teacher? Was it because they're funny, or because you learned a lot, or what was it?
So I there were teachers that I learned a lot, and that were also I always really respected teachers who could deliver a good lecture in a way that was really good, that was really powerful. Like you could kind of paint a picture with it. Like for instance, even like my eighth grade social studies teacher, Mr. Matheson, like he was a guy like I could totally see him in like a college environment, but yet he was teaching eighth graders, and so. But he was a guy. He was teaching mostly like history type stuff, and he really was a very good lecturer. And I mentioned Mr. Wilson. He's also a Facebook friend of mine still after all these years. And he's of course long since retired, but I do remember an autobiography lesson that they give us. So we had this thing where we had to write our own autobiography, which was really cool, and I really enjoyed that a lot. It's still kicking around at home somewhere. But yeah, that kind of thing.
So hang on a minute. You had to write an autobiography at the age of what?
At the age of, would have been 15.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whatever I had accomplished by the time I was 15, and a lot of it, of course, was like forward looking, like what do you see yourself doing? And at the time, I had a couple potential goals. Like I could either have gone the science route, like my dad, he was a biology teacher for 33 years in high school. So I was thinking maybe I'll go the science route. I also thought at the time, oh, maybe I'll be a journalist or something like that. I don't know. Um, there wasn't anything. There wasn't any real such thing as the tech sector at that point. I mean, sure, there might have been. I'm sure there were, of course, a few jobs in that, but just wasn't really much of a thing back then. So I never really had any exposure or any realization that I could do what I'm doing now. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I will definitely get onto that later on in the interview about what you're doing now and what you've done since then, obviously. So what did you major in college?
So in college, I majored in biology for the first year, and I nearly failed out of college because I did not do very well. Not because I was not able to hack it, but because there was so much. Well, I mean, I guess I wasn't able to hack it, but it was not because I couldn't understand the subject material. It's because I was way too involved and focused on the social aspects of it. Because by the time I got to college, all of that stuff that I didn't really do in high school, in terms of like relationships and everything like that, all of that became much more important to me to do that, and to also to make more friends, different types of friends, and just a whole new world of being able to do whatever I wanted to do. And I definitely did not handle that particularly well, but I got it together, and I switched my major to psychology as well. So I finished up with a bachelor's in psychology, and then after that, I got my master's in counseling psychology.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And is that what you went on to do for a career?
For a year and a half, yeah, and then I promptly dropped all of that to go into tech and never look back. So
Right.
all that, but I always say though that all of that was not for nothing. That time that I spent getting those degrees was well worth it, and a lot of what I did learn in getting those degrees, I know it sounds a bit cliche, but learning how to think as opposed to learning facts and figures and all that kind of thing, learning specifics. A lot of it was about understanding what it is, how it is to come to conclusions about something, and stats and that kind of thing. So,
Digressing just off of what you just said, though, I mean, it's difficult to know for sure. I mean, every child is different, which makes this more of a problem. But I mean, when it comes to teaching someone how to think, as opposed to teaching them a bunch of facts and hoping they retain the facts, and can therefore deduce some sort of sensible, how to think is actually something that I don't think gets emphasized in the educational system to any great degree. At least not K through 12, at least not in the 70s when I was going through school. I don't know what school's like nowadays. So somehow I don't think it feels like it's not as good because there's so many more kids in classes now than there used to be,
Yeah, it's definitely. I'm sure the class sizes have probably increased over the years, and yeah, it's definitely a new ball game. And of course, with technology, that a lot of that has changed the game considerably as well, and that really didn't ramp up until like a few years after I was out of school, and then that started to become much more important. I mean, yes, there were computers to some extent, but most classrooms at that point, when I was like in high school, most classrooms didn't even have a computer, and certainly kids didn't have laptops or anything like that. That was like
Mm.
unheard of. I mean, laptop would have been very expensive at that point.
Yeah,
Nobody really, I grew up in a pretty blue collar town. Nobody, very few people could have afforded it if they wanted it, including
sure.
myself.
I just want to bring up a comment here from the Green Machine. It says math teaches you how to think, but only in terms of math. You know what? I think Sudoku teaches you how to think in a very good way. It's because you learn logical deduction in Sudoku in a way that helps you in other ways. You don't have to be playing Sudoku. Once you understand that sort of logical, deduction, it can't be that, can't be that, can't be that, must be that kind of thing.
Right.
you
No, it's
know.
kind of it's like Wordle, right? Wordle's isn't that the Sudoku version of a word game, right? You with have you played that at all, Wordle?
I have not dared.
It's the new thing, that
I keep
everybody's
seeing that word around, Wordle, 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 and I'm
right,
like,
right. Everybody
like
posts their
I
like
mentioned
how they
before,
got to
my sort of
the
nonconformist kicks in. I'm like, I can't even look at it because if it's really good, my gal will never see me. I'll just be like this all the time. Yeah.
well, so to put your mind a little bit at ease with Wordle, like there's only they only give you one word per day. So it's literally it's like you do it for like 2 minutes and then you're done until the next day. So it's not the kind of thing where you're gonna be doing it over and over and over again. So it's part of
Fair
the
enough.
charm, I think.
What was your first car, and did you start driving like when you were 16, or did
Oh
you?
no.
No.
No, I had to be sort of nudged into driving because it sort of made me nervous, the responsibility of driving and like and I did learn at 16, but I didn't learn like on my birthday or anything. My dad was like was like, okay, yeah, let's learn a little bit. And I started out on our little I grew up on a dirt road, and so uh yeah, we had plenty of opportunities to kind of just drive up and down the road, which hardly anyone else drove on, and
Sure.
so I got that practice. But then I got my regular license at 17 because I took driver's ed in the summer.
And what
So
was your
yeah,
first
and
car?
first car
Owned
was
yourself?
it was a what?
The first car you owned yourself.
The first car that I owned myself was a Buick Somerset. It was about a 1986, I want to say, and this was in 1995 after I just graduated from undergrad. And
Right.
it was not a very good car.
Your
it was
first car's not supposed to be a very good car.
no, it's not supposed to be a very good car, and it wasn't. And yeah, it was. It definitely had issues. The transmission went after like a year and a half, and then the engine went like 6 months after I got that fixed, and so that got traded in, and I got a Saturn. Um,
I know what those were like. My mom used to have a Saturn.
right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I have to confess though, I might have to look that Buick up because yeah, it doesn't ring any bells. But I mean, it's always interesting what people's first cars are. I think you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Because it really depends a lot on environment, what we're doing for our first job, and everything like that, and how far
Mhm.
you need to drive every day and stuff like that. Anyway, um, all right, so getting a little bit more personal. So how old were you the first time you definitely knew you were in love?
I was 21 when I definitely knew I was in love, and that was my first girlfriend. And the relationship was wonderful in a lot of ways, and that first love relationship is something that you never forget. I do have a lot of regrets about how it went and how it ended, and even the last 6 months, it made a real impression on me. And there's a lot of that. I definitely have a lot of regrets about how I handled the aftermath of that, and it was a terrible time in my life, and a time when I wish I had somebody that was sort of more experienced than I was to kind of tell me to chill out, and like this doesn't mean this is not like the end of your
Did you
relationship.
go through any like rebounding or anything like that?
There was definitely oh yeah, there's definitely some rebounding. There was yeah, that couple years after that there were it was quite a busy time for me, although it wasn't there were even within that time there were a couple of relationships that I um see as like to some extent significant, and most of almost everyone, not sure almost everyone, but most relationships that I've been in are still friends to this day, at least casually on Facebook, etc. But due to how poorly I handled that first love relationship, unfortunately, I'm not. It's not one of those things that can be salvaged. I'm afraid probably the best I can do is simply probably stay away forever, which is a little sad, but It's
Yeah, I do understand. I do understand. It is interesting. Like the first love definitely is just. I think it sticks in everybody's sort of. It's kind of, I don't, almost like unattainably, like, I don't know, hard to match in certain ways. Even though
yeah,
you can fall more deeply in love later on, and
right.
and so on. But especially because part of it, let's be honest, is just the hormones and brain chemistry of being young,
Mhm.
and it's just true that everything's that much more intense, biting to an orange, anything.
Yeah,
It's just that
yeah,
much more intense.
right. Yeah, and that was definitely certainly a big part of it, and also my relative inexperience also meant that I didn't have a lot to fall back on in terms of relationships, like a real relationship, because I hadn't really had any much of any like significant relationship before that. So
Mm.
there wasn't this sort of like it was like there's this and then there's all these other little things that sort of stopped and started or just gotten started, and so it was also at a time when it ended right before I graduated from undergrad, and I had this huge support structure of friends and people in my fraternity. I was in a fraternity, but it was a co-ed social fraternity. It wasn't like an Animal House kind of fraternity, but
Yeah,
it was
yeah, yeah. That's what they all say. Yeah.
right. Right. Do they all say that? That it was a co-ed fraternity? But yeah, and that was great. And all of those people are still great friends as well. But it was very hard making that transition from into grad school, being like kind of like really on my own, and not really knowing anyone. And also still getting over that sort of first love experience. Um, which yeah, I didn't handle it well. But
And when you say you didn't handle it well, what does that mean? Did you drink too much, or did you just
no, no, it's
not
funny.
concentrate at
Like
school like you wanted to, or what?
no, what it mostly was like I became sort of, I don't know, I can't became a bit antisocial in some ways. Like in some ways, like I was really like hypersocial, and I always wanted to be around friends, and I would go visit like as much as I could go visit the old campus, which was a couple hour drive away, and I would do that as much as possible to kind of recapture my friends network that was there, and I remember doing some things that were really like very out of character for me. And it was never like alcohol. I couldn't really afford that anyway, and that's never really been my go-to anyhow. Um,
Right.
so which probably, which I'm sure is good for me anyway to not do that. But I remember one time like I went into a class of mine like in grad school, and I was like I handed in a paper or something like that, and I said, I'm going to go rollerblading, and I left, which is like, I mean, to me, I'm like looking at me at that point, I'm like, why would I do that? That's just ridiculous. But that was kind of me at that time. I was just not happy, not in a very good place. Probably the worst. That was easily the worst year of my life when I was 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, considering it's so long ago, that is good news.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
You know, it's a
My
good, I mean,
life
put
in
in
general has
perspective,
been
you
quite
know.
good. So I can't really. I don't have a ton of complaints, to be honest. Comparatively, I've had it pretty good in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, I feel the same way. As I said to the gang on the Jamboree last night, every day for the past 22 years is gravy to me because I honestly never thought I'd see the other side 2000. I grew up in the Cold War era to the point where I was just sure that someone was going to press the button by now. You
Oh,
know what I mean? So I've always just had this underlying sort of like gratitude. Every day is gravy, as far as I'm concerned.
wow.
Yeah.
Good.
Um, right. You could take this question any way you want.
Okay.
What's the worst thing you've ever done for money?
The worst thing I've ever done for money.
Like, I could either be like the most demeaning thing, or if you ever felt exploited or whatever.
I don't think so. I don't have any like, I don't have any like really, really dramatic stories about that. I mean, my first job was working at McDonald's. I guess as demeaning as that could be for anyone. Um, it's and I was working for, at the time, I believe it was minimum wage, I think, was 325, but it
Right.
was but they were actually giving us 375 because that was shortly before they were going to raise it anyway. And so that yeah, I mean, literally flipping burgers at the time when burgers actually were flipped. And then later, a few years later, I would still work at McDonald's, like coming back from college for breaks and stuff. And they had the things where you just put them down. You don't have to flip the burgers. They just cook on both sides at the same time,
Oh, I
But
didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, I actually, I surmised that just by watching, but I didn't really know what was going on,
yeah,
Um, So yeah, I mean McDonald's. I don't think I don't know. I don't think it should be demeaning, but I think an awful lot of people find it embarrassing to admit they ever worked at McDonald's.
yeah. No, I don't find it embarrassing at all. It's just given the question, what's the worst, what's
Sure,
the most
sure.
meaning thing you've done with money? I guess it's that.
And what's the best job you've ever had? Like in terms of like fulfillment or monetary success or whatever, whichever way you want to define it.
Well, I'd say the best job I ever had is probably, yeah, I would say it's got to be the one I'm at now. It just because I feel like, so number one, I feel valued, which is important. And I'm doing a job that, like, okay, so there's always this idea that, like, everyone's replaceable, right? Which is true, which is generally true. Everybody is replaceable, and that includes me. But I know that I'm in a job where there are definitely a very limited number of people who can do what I do, and so that does make me valuable. But I also like that I contribute to the team, and I always have kind of had the opinion too that unless you really really love something like a lot, that you want to do a specific thing, then make your time worth as much as possible so
Right.
that you can get the most out of the time that you're not working. um, and yeah, and I feel, and I also I have a good boss. I have a good boss's boss. I can't I don't have a lot of complaints at the moment. um, so yeah, I do enjoy
Are
that.
you able to talk about what you do for a living?
I can talk about it in general terms. So I work for a very large multinational company, and we make software, which, let's see. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at
Do
that.
you write code or and stuff like that?
No, I do not. No, I'm a risk analyst.
Okay.
So basically, I'm an expert in the software. I'm an expert in being a user of the software that I support, and a few different types of software, one in particular, but others as well. And so I'm not a coder. And so that's outside of my, but I have been client facing for many years. I'm mostly not client facing at the moment, but I am occasionally client facing as well.
All right. And it's really, really so because you say this is your most sort of fulfilling job that you've had. I mean, how long have you been at this now?
So it'll be 15 years in July. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's been a while. My actual day to day role has changed a bit over time. I mean, most of the first like 12 years or so, that was primarily client facing, and now it's more helping teams in other regions to handle the stuff that I used to do. And there are a number of things that kind of go along with that. But yeah, it's been almost 15 years. I started with a startup, and that startup was then purchased by a large multinational in 2013. So
Right.
so yeah.
So you've been along for that ride as well, and
Yes.
you've experienced the gobble as a person being gobbled, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was a really good situation. That was a really good day. It was cool. It was, something that, I knew the founder of the company and had worked with him before, and then I started working for him when he started this company, and the company got bigger and bigger, and then got got
Yeah,
gobbled.
yeah.
Okay, so
Well, it's got to be a pretty great feeling.
yeah.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, and again, take this however you like. What do you think is the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life?
The biggest mistake I ever made in my life. I almost would have to go back to that, probably that college experience. Like, that was just the way that I handled that was just wrong on every level. And not only that, but like my own conduct just in everything else in that year following. Like, my first year of grad school was just a mess, and just should not be repeated by anyone at any time. And I just never, I didn't really have, I was able to get sort of work myself out of it, um and sort of recover who I was, and that kind of thing. um and so that, it all obviously turned out okay. uh
Well, okay, so butterfly effect aside, I mean, obviously taking as read that if you turn left when you could have turned right, everything would be different. But forget about that, and just say that you could, everything else would change the same, would be the same, but you could modify your conduct. What would you modify about it? That would have just your attitude or your behavior, or what?
Both. Yeah, I mean, definitely my behavior. Like, I should have just said, okay, if I cut my losses now, like, basically don't, like, stop fretting about the past, like, not trying to fix it by, like, trying to be friends immediately or something like that, which obviously didn't work very well, and I didn't go about it in what I can obviously see now. It was
Right.
completely the wrong way. It would have been much better for me to just say, okay, I'm just going to go, and then later I could have been like, hey, how's it go? Because that's happened with other people that I've been with before, other friends that I just haven't seen in a long time. Like, I've seen them on Facebook or whatever, and there hasn't been that kind of history, and so I've been able to cultivate really nice friendships with people I've been with before. But that one, I burned that bridge to the ground, not, well, unwittingly, I guess, but just, but yeah, I do. That is certainly my biggest regret in a life without a lot of big regrets. In general, very few regrets. So
Well, that's good. That's really good to hear. Just as an aside, I mean, have you, because you've said you live more or less in, I guess, the East Coast, in New York, especially New York State, for quite a long time. Do you have like a friend that you still have that you've been friends with since forever?
yeah, yeah, I still have a couple friends from high school. Not not particularly many. I have one friend that lives up in Saratoga Springs that I know from high school, and some other friends from even earlier than that. One who lives in LA, and then another who I had a falling out with about a year and a half ago, after Trump lost. And as you can imagine, it had something to do with politics, and it was ugly. And we essentially are no longer friends, though it was never like officially like, oh, I'm never going to talk to you again. It's just kind of, unfriended. And I don't know. And we were quite close, back in high school and even beyond that. So it's kind of sad, but
It's interesting, and you remind me of something we talked about in the stream last night. I mean, I'm going to be 60 later this year.
mhm,
And so I have lived through the same world that you've lived through. And it's only really been in the past sort of 10 or maybe 12, 15 years at the top that there's been this massive shift of animosity. I mean, there's always been undercurrent of animosity in American culture. That's a given,
mhm.
right? But I mean, I don't know, man. I was gone for 31 years and I came back to a country I didn't recognize, you know? So
It's a long time to be gone, and and it's funny because I mentioned it before, but every once in a while I'll hear something that you say that even without a British accent, I'm like, he got that from the UK, because I only
it
hear
happens
British
all the
people
time.
say it. Yeah, because you say it in an American accent, but the words you say is something that only Brits will say.
Yeah, I do that a lot. I do that a lot. I don't even notice myself do it. You know, it's ingrained to me now.
Right.
And who knows how long it'll take me, if ever, to drop those sorts of
No,
idiosyncrasies.
you shouldn't. You
And
should get
sometimes to
hard.
acquire them. I was quite resistant to acquiring any British idioms and stuff when I first moved over there. I was like, no, man, I'm American. I don't say mate. I don't say blimey. You know. But you know, sooner or later, it just and it's just you just end up, you know, you absorb the culture, and isn't that what the people in the culture want you to do anyway? Is to some degree take on the culture. You know, if you're a foreign interloper, they want you to sort of, you know, try to fit in. So
Mhm.
that's, you inevitably end up doing it. You know, whether you necessarily mean to or not. I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, since we're talking about your greater sins at the moment, with the greatest mistake you've ever made, now we're going
Right.
to move on. Now we're going to move on to the what do you think is the worst lie you've ever told?
The worst lie I've ever told.
Yeah,
Boy, I am not sure. The worst lie I've ever told. Um, I don't know what. I'm not sure what that would be. Biggest lie I ever told. I mean, obviously, I mean, I do, as most people do. They try to be as honest as possible. It doesn't mean I never ever have lied, of course, but I don't know what, in terms of like the most impactful. Um, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure really that I have an answer.
that's a tough one. We might have to circle back to that one later. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so.
We'll see. I mean, because you know, I hear what you're saying. You know, we hopefully, decent people anyway, make an effort. You know,
Right.
to be honest. But honesty is more than telling the truth. I mean, honesty is also, you know, if you're absolutely honest, you don't even exaggerate. You know what I mean? If you're
Yeah. I
absolutely
mean,
honest, you don't use
right.
sarcasm, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so
And there's always people. There's always things that like people will exaggerate things, you know, for the sake of, you know, social cohesion and not, you know, not hurting people's feelings and that kind of thing. But still, even then, people find a way to usually to convey it without being rude. Like those kinds of people that are like, well, I'm just being honest, you know, right before they say something incredibly insensitive that may be completely true, but is said just in a way that is going to do the maximum emotional damage to someone. That's yeah, I don't. I
So
never.
if you could choose between these two superpowers, which would you choose?
Mm-hmm.
Superpower A is the ability to always tell when someone is being deceitful,
Mm-hmm.
or superpower B, nobody ever being able to tell when you're being deceitful.
Let's see. Oh, always being able to tell if someone else. Oh, I see. So yes, always being able to tell if someone else is deceitful, and making sure that no one else can tell if I'm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I would say the first one. I mean, the second one is one of those things that, in the wrong hands or in the wrong frame of mind, it could definitely lead you into some pretty dark paths. If, in order, you know, if you could literally just deceive everyone around you with at will.
And
That
get away with you could get away with everything you ever wanted to get away with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could.
It's almost guaranteed to corrupt anyone, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
On
and
the
that's
other hand, the
the
first
problem.
superpower is, you know, you might lose faith in humanity because everyone's dishonest more often than most of us really like to want to believe, right?
Yeah, but I think I do already believe that. I think I already know that, though, that there's a lot of that there are a lot of ways that people are small. I don't think that would. I don't think that would damage my faith in humanity that much. Um,
Right.
though I do believe, yeah, having the other superpower, it would be a little bit like having the One Ring, and it's a little too much. Yeah.
Well, I think I've asked several people that question over the past 15 years or so, and I always find the answer quite revealing because, yeah, to me, when someone says that they want the second superpower, I find that quite revealing. You know, I want to always be able to get away with lying. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah. It's just
That just betrays a sneaky personality, right?
right. It would seem so anyway. That's yeah. It's kind of
Yeah. So, not counting offspring, what's your proudest achievement?
I don't have any offspring
Okay.
aside from furry cats. Have a wife who I affectionately refer to as Mrs. Zaunstar when I in my videos, etc. And two cats. My proudest achievement. Uh, I mean, so there are a lot of things I'm proud of. The fact that I've been able to come a a family where my parents are still alive, still great people, and they always taught me the importance of education and everything. That's been really important in my life to get to where I am now. And I guess being able to navigate the world and get to where I am personally in my like career slash financial goals, that I know I'm not going to have to work until I'm 80, kind of thing, which is important to me. I want to make sure that for Mrs. Zonstar and I, that we are in shape, that like we have options. And even if things were to really go south in this country, and things were to look really really bad, and we want to move somewhere else, we could do that if we needed to. And
Hmm.
that's important to me as well. Over the past few years, the past handful of years especially, I've watched how things have devolved here in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I would have told you before, there's basically a 0% chance that I'd want out, but now that chance is well above zero. I don't know exactly where it is, and I don't think it's even anywhere near 50, but it's definitely way above zero. And so those are the kinds of things that I think about. But in terms of, okay, so to circle back to the original question, it's kind of a tangential answer. So in terms of a specific thing that I'm proud of, maybe I'll just kind of go a little more concrete. Um, I'm really happy that I was able to take my parents on a trip to Europe in 2016, because my dad had never been to Europe, and my mom hadn't been there since she was 21. She went with my grandma. So uh,
And when
I
you say take them to Europe, is that sort of like a multinational tour of Europe, like a bus tour or
yeah.
something?
So
Or
what I did is I told my mom and dad, I said, Dad, pick a city in Europe. Mom, pick a city in Europe. We're going to go to both of them for 5 days each, and I'm going to take you and be your personal tour guide. That was in 2016. I was actually going to do it sooner. I was going to do it right after the startup I worked for got bought. And but my mom was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. So that she was fine and she's all good now, but it was caught really early. But so after a couple of months being postponed, because I was originally going to send them on like a tour, a guided tour through a company that we often use. But so Dad picked London, Mom picked Vienna, and we went there and had an amazing time, and saw all the sights. And it was definitely a once in a lifetime kind of trip. And, yeah, really loved it.
yeah, well, I mean, this is I have more stock questions, but this is actually a good place to segue into some of the questions I wanted to ask you about traveling, because I've known you for some time now, and I've been aware that you've been a traveler to Europe in the past, and that puts you in like a small percentage of Americans, right? And as someone who lived abroad for such a long time, I find it amusing, especially on certain media outlets, how they portray Europe in terms of it's like, because they rely on the fact that 91% of Americans haven't got passports.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, about half of last I heard, it was something like half or less than half have passports. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but in Europe, it's of course way higher than that. The people who are always talking a lot of nonsense about Europe are usually the same types of people that are talking a lot of crap about U.S. cities too, about
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, San Francisco's a cesspool," or New York is a hellhole, or this is that, and that, and they're always throwing at any big city. They'll just say, "Oh, these cities are terrible," and they're counting on their audience never having been to those cities. And or thinking that like, oh wow, it's really gone downhill since the last time I was there. You know, there never used to be mentally ill people in this city. You're like, okay, that's strange.
Well, I'm going to paraphrase John Travolta from Pulp Fiction, but he's telling Samuel L. Jackson's character about Europe, and he says, they got the same shit over there, but it's just a little bit
Right,
different.
a little different. Right,
and that's the best description I've ever heard, really, of because it's really hard to pin it down unless you're going to go on the internet and show people pictures and then try to explain to them what they're seeing, because most people, if they see a movie and it's got a foreign city in it, it's probably London or Paris, more often than not. And so people have ideas that they know what it's like over there when they have really no idea what the culture's like, or what the different systems like for transportation or the healthcare systems, that kind of stuff, things that we could benefit from learning from in America, in my opinion, that people just like want to shut their eyes to because it's changed and it's different and it's other, and it's that can't possibly be better because we would already be doing it before them if it was better, kind of an issue. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, and there's also too when people talk about Europe, it's like Europe. They're talking about Europe as a monolith or something. Like there's no differences between Portugal and Sweden and Greece and Poland. Yeah, these are places.
Amen to that.
Yeah, and there's just so many different cultures within that.
So how many countries have you visited?
43 so far.
43 countries. And on how many of the continents does that spread out?
That is 6 continents. Only got Antarctica to go.
You have to, my daughter's quite a traveler as well. She's been to 52 or something countries, but she has never been to Australia. You've obviously been to Australia.
Yep.
But she looked into going to Antarctica a few years ago, and it was like $8,000 or something.
Yes, it's about between 8 and 10 grand, depending on what kind of what tour package you want to put together. The company that we usually use for guided tours, if we go that, sometimes we often will do it ourselves. Sometimes we'll take a guided tour, and Antarctica, it's usually along with the Buenos Aires tour. Like they'll take you to Buenos Aires for a couple days, spend a couple days there, and then head to Patagonia and off on the ship to Antarctica. And yeah, we're gonna do that probably in the next few years ish.
I was gonna say the tone of your voice makes me think that it's actually already in the works.
Oh yeah, no, it's already been thought of for sure. And there's definitely a lot. There are a ton of places that I still want to go, and that's definitely one of them.
Well, and is that just because it's like a bucket list? You got to tick it off because it's just the undone thing.
No, it really is. There's a lot I really do want to understand about that place too, because it's a huge continent, but of course for obvious reasons it's not really exactly owned by anyone. So it's kind of with the ice on it. It's just seeing the penguins and seeing like the little islands and like how like it's just going to be interesting to see what it's like. And those tours usually go off around this time of year too. It's usually January, February, March.
Well, have you seen the satellite footage over the past few years of the shrinkage of the ice plates? It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, well, that's in the Arctic. I'm
talking about the Antarctic.
The Antarctic as well. Yeah. So there is shrinkage so there's places that are just sloughing off parts of the glaciers and stuff like that. They're just like this piece of glacier, like the size of Manhattan or something, or I don't know.
Just slide down the mountain.
Yeah, just sliding into the ocean. Like, well, you multiply that by a few thousand times, and there's your sea level rise. And then in the Arctic as well, of course, there's a lot of ice-free zone now that didn't used to be ice-free in the summer.
Right.
It's a whole different thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, the whole Arctic Ocean froze over, and that almost never freezes all the way over anymore. And that's just one example of climate change. But I really didn't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole. So you've been to Asia. Have you been to like Southeast Asia or
Yes.
Japan, China?
Yeah, I've been yes and yes. I've been, so the countries in Asia that I've been to, so this reminds me of remember this old YouTube drama like a billion years ago, that someone was arguing about like what constitutes Asia. There was some argument. I
It's
think
Happy Cabby and Coughlin.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. It was Happy Cat. I couldn't remember that it was Koffel. Yeah, I forgot. And he was like, well, Israel's not in Asia or something like that, showing that. Anyway, just a wild tangent. But so yeah, I've been to United Arab Emirates, which Happy Cabby may have told you was not in Asia, but actually is. And I've been to China. I've been to Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, and South Korea, and
Indonesia's 10,000 islands. Can you be more specific?
yes,
Like,
I was in Jakarta specifically. I was just in Jakarta, and that was a work trip, and also so Japan I've been to 4 times actually. So
yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, 3 for work, and then
I can't even comprehend the size of Tokyo. It's like 30 million people or whatever. I mean, I don't even know what that looks like. Yeah,
it's huge, but it doesn't look like 30 million more because obviously they're not. It's a sprawling area.
It's a sprawl like LA rather than a stack like New York.
It's sort of a combination. It's like it's both. It's sprawling and also stacked, and that's why it's so many people.
Right.
But it's not stacked as high once you get to the suburbs. But those suburbs extend for miles and miles in each direction. So you can just keep going, and you take the Tokyo subway system, and you can just it's amazing. You can just I've been to some of the like suburban areas and stuff like that, and there's like 1,000 of them.
I bet you must be particularly glad that you've managed to do so much, see so much of the world before the COVID era, because traveling nowadays is a pain in the ass.
Very much so, because, and that's something that I was thinking of too. Like I always tell people, don't wait to travel, just do it, just go. And I've always said that. Don't wait till retirement. Don't wait until like whatever. And obviously I'm very aware that travel can be expensive, and especially traveling overseas that can be, it's of course pretty expensive. So not everyone is able to do that, but if you have the means and you want to do it, then by all means don't wait to do it. Don't use like kids as an excuse. Like your kids will survive for a week without you, probably, if you've got grandparents or some other relatives who are reasonably competent and can take care of them for a week or whatever.
You can drag them around the world with you. That'll
be
just
you certainly can do that as well. Yeah, absolutely, and you do that as well if they're especially if they're of the age that who can they can really get something out of it, especially. But however you want to do it. But what I'm saying is like there are all these excuses that people can put up, non-monetary ones that are like, well, this or that, and like and it just becomes daunting, and like there are people who just don't really know where to start, and I've been happy to help people start on that, like how to afford it and that kind of thing, like understanding the credit cards to get in order to get miles for travel and that kind of thing. There's a lot of people who don't understand the credit card game, and I understand that very well. So yep.
Yeah. No, and like when I used to live in the UK, I'd say this, but if you it's just as true for Americans. I mean, if you really want to like start easy, travel to places like Canada or the UK or Australia where they already speak English, and you don't have this learning curve. You don't feel too far like a fish out of water. And once you get a taste for traveling, it's less daunting. I think going on a plane and going overseas can be very daunting for people, even if they don't want to admit it.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of different ways to do it that it feels more safe. Like if you're going to go to some place, and especially if you don't speak the language, and even if you do, it's just a lot easier sometimes to go with a tour company where you know kind of what to expect. The one we use is Go Ahead Tours, and we've always found that we've taken 9 tours with them since 2007. so we're very familiar with how it works. And because they handle the transportation for you and everything, and they make sure that like all of the major sites, like you'll go to those sites on the city tour once you get to a city, but then you get like the afternoon, the evening free, do whatever you want. So you can plan your own stuff, or they have optional tours where you can go with them and pay a
Yeah,
little.
it really depends on what you want to get out of
Yeah,
traveling. Like some people want to like really experience the culture and the people and go drinking in the pubs locally and
right.
raise their glass and sing the songs in German and
Yes,
all that kind of stuff.
right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I
um,
want to do all that. Yeah, that's always like, and Chris and I, like, Mrs. Zaunstar and I, when we go places, we count that as like a win if we're just like walking down the street and a local asks us in the local language where something is, like, because we look like we're blending in, right?
right.
We're not just.
Yeah, that's actually a skill because I can usually spot Americans in the UK dead ezy.
Mhm. Oh, I'm sure.
It's
Yeah.
pretty easy to spot. That's not really a skill.
Yeah. It's a thing.
Anyway, so obviously a moment ago you said that you don't have any offspring. That must have been a conscious decision, or is it a medical necessity?
No, no, it was a conscious decision. And we sort of had it. It was an open question when we got married whether we would or would not have children. And I wanted to be at least open to the idea, but I wasn't like chomping at the bit to definitely have a kid.
Sure.
But and she ultimately was like, I'm just not really. I just don't really want kids. And I was like, okay, well, it's not. And it was more like, if she had said I definitely want a kid, I would have been like, okay, let's do that.
Yeah, sure, I can dig it. I know quite a few people, slightly younger than me, and maybe one or two in my own generation of people who are childless and happy about it, never wanted
Mhm.
kids, and they get sick and tired of always being asked the question, "Why did you want to have kids?" and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
as if it's an obligation in life, and it's only an obligation if that's what you want.
right,
in, in
right.
my opinion, you know what I mean. And I know a lot of people. Well, I used to be better acquainted with on YouTube some people who like were in their early 30s and still didn't know if they wanted to have a kid. And to
Mhm.
me, that was kind of hard to comprehend because I knew when I was a kid, or when I was a kid, that I wanted to grow up and have kids. So it was really hard to comprehend how you can get to sort of 34, 35, and like, I'm not sure. I thought by then, I think I would have made up my mind one way or the other, so.
Yeah, that was about the time we were like, okay, are we not? And like, no, I guess we're not. So
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause you must have been like enjoying your life, and you had more time
yeah,
for each other that way, and everything
yeah,
like that. It's a trade off, you
yeah.
know.
And my sister has two kids, so I've got a niece and a nephew. So there's no short, and my wife also has two nieces, and so
And
it's
how old are all those littles?
so yeah. Well, her nieces are actually adults now because she has quite a bit older sister. She's like the last of five. So her oldest sister has two kids that are both in their early 20s, and then my niece is 11 and my nephew is 8. So
Oh, wow. So yeah, that's good. Plenty of good times to have and still to come with all that stuff.
absolutely, yep.
Yeah, yeah. And the good thing about it when you're in extremity, whether you're a friend of the family or an uncle or a grandfather,
Mhm.
everyone makes this joke, but it's true. They're not yours. You can give them back.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
you can enjoy that. You can enjoy them as long as you want, and then give them back.
yes,
And so so
yep, right.
and that's pretty cool. Right, and I want to come back to some other stuff about. Is there any place besides Antarctica that you haven't been that you really have to go, and now that there's COVID, you might not ever be able to go?
I don't think there's any place that I would never be able to go. There are definitely some places like, there are some maybe other cities in China and or like Hong Kong and places like that where I would have been more comfortable going before than I would now. Not just from COVID, just the overall like political social climate. China's getting much more authoritarian, and it's just not a great that my visa for China is still good for a couple more years, but um, I don't know that I'll ever get back there again. But it's okay. I saw Shanghai. I've stayed in Beijing most of the time I was there. I was there for 5 weeks on one
Sure.
trip.
Well, China has really kicked up. I mean, I lived in London for the last 7 years. I lived in the UK, and there's like 4 million cameras in a city of 7 million people. And I
Mhm.
take it that Chinese cities now are heavily surveillanced, and there's like a merit system, and you can get merits or demerits and blah blah blah. And that's just
Yeah,
it's a little bit dark and kind of dystopian and
right.
obviously authoritarian, and the scope for corruption of that is beyond I can't
Yeah.
even.
Black Mirror is not supposed to be something you're striving toward.
Yeah,
So it's not it's supposed to be a warning, not a template.
right, right. So let's just pretend that I'm a genie, right?
Mhm.
And you get to have three wishes, but one of them can't be for you. Go.
Oh, I have three wishes, but one of them can't be for me.
Yeah.
Huh. I have three wishes, but one of them can't be for me. I would say that the one thing that I would want. So, I usually, yeah. Anytime I've thought of this, it's usually something along the lines of having all of the knowledge available to me about like everything in the world, but not in a way that it's like it's almost think of it more like it's a Google search, and like I would if I want to know a certain thing, I would have to actually actively be like, huh, what how many people in the world are actually hungry right now or something like that, or start like I'd have to actually I don't want I don't want like to have everything just like suddenly crashing down on me like that. No, so and then the second thing would I mean be would be immortality, obviously. Because I feel like too people talk about Hitchens quotes or something like that. I always thought that I like Hitchens in general. I don't really lionize him like some people do, but I thought that one of his quotes toward the end of his life was interesting, where he said, "Knowing that you're going to die is like knowing that you're really enjoying the party, but you have to go, and but the party's going to continue, and you won't know like what happened." And I think that's it's kind of where I'm with that too. So being able to continue to enjoy, I guess that would be my second one. And so the third one, if it's not for me, the third one would be that the world would that human nature would change such that we are I'm not sure if kinder or more intelligent, like that sort of kind of something that we feel more connected to each other, to our fellow human beings, in ways that we would feel toward maybe not necessarily our immediate family, but at least people in our community,
Sure.
and that would, I think, go a long way to resolving or at least lowering the level of conflict and just war, disease, etc., just all kinds of things like that.
As regards your second wish and the immortality thing, right? I mean, I talked about this on a live stream a couple weeks ago with some of the other gang, but like there's this mad rush going on right now. You probably know something about it.
Hmm.
What's the word I'm looking for? Transhumanism. You know,
Hmm.
where they're trying to learn how to copy your personality and memories and then download them into an artificial host body, right?
Right.
Now, and some of the audience members, when we talked about this on the streams, were like, "Yeah, what about your soul?" I mean, I don't believe in souls, and I don't think that if there was such a thing, it could be copied. So either way, it's a moot point. The point that I have asked people, and I'd be very interested in your opinion about this. If you could be sufficiently convinced that your personality was copied and your memories were copied. So let's just say you downloaded
Hmm.
everything that you've ever clicked has been copied and downloaded and analyzed. And also you've done these questionnaires specifically for the purpose, and your actions have been monitored specifically for the purpose for X number of years, so that you get this complete picture of who you are, so that you can be copied in such a way that you might meaningfully be called yourself after you're gone. Right.
Mhm.
How could you be convinced of that? Could you be convinced that the copy is good enough to be considered to be you after you're gone?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are things like so think of Star Trek, for instance, like when they're beaming you down someplace, right? It's now I don't, and I'm by no means an expert in Star Trek lore or anything like that, but you're sort of taking the person and you're deconstructing them in one place and then reconstructing them somewhere else, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, you do literally subatomic particle by subatomic particle. Yeah,
Right. And so those people are still seeing like a consistent time span of time, right? They're not like, oh, what just happened, kind of thing. They know what happened. So
yeah.
um, I think
In
that
one place, and all of a sudden you're another place. Yeah,
right, all of a sudden you're just in another place. And so I could believe that. Yeah, you could certainly convince me of something like that. If we get to that level of technology, I don't specifically see that happening. Well, then there's another Black Mirror episode too with the Be Right Back. Remember that one where he gets in a car accident and he
reanimates basically. Yeah,
right, sort of reanimates, but it's but it's just too weird and she doesn't.
it's,
Yeah,
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, I could see that as being sort of an in between stage, right? That's like kind of where we're kind of we're getting there, but it's not quite perfect yet. That's kind of what that's describing, right? That's the early stage of what we're talking about. Of
sure. But I'm just curious. At what could you be convinced that a copy of you was you? I mean, you'd have to interview your copy, wouldn't you? And try and catch it out to see if
right.
it would answer in a way that you wouldn't answer.
Yeah, so like the equivalent of like a Turing test, except for another you. It's
Right.
yeah. I think that could easily be done because all you need to do is ask something that you have in your head, but you have never talked about or discussed with anyone else. And I think that would be relatively simple because everybody's got tons of those kinds of things like rattling around their head. Nothing, not even like important things, but just weird thoughts that happen to come up. You come up with one of those and say, "Hey, you remember the blah blah blah," and that way you could figure out if it's really you or not.
Yeah. Wow. That's a yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it because there's a big push going on for this. They want to have transhumanism a thing by 2050. And I don't really follow it as closely as I might have done previously when I was single and bored. I might have followed it, but right now I'm too busy for all that.
Right, right.
Anyway,
Yeah, it's not it's nothing that it's definitely not a thing. It's something that I'm aware of, but I really don't spend any time looking into that.
right, yeah. So getting on with some of the questions here. I've only got a few more of the stock questions, and then I want to get on to a little more personal
Sure.
stuff. What would you change about yourself if you could change anything? And it doesn't have to be about. Uh, it could be anything about yourself, personality or looks or attitude, characteristics, whatever you think.
Let's see. Something that I would change about myself. I would say being maybe a bit more focused, being able to be less distractible, like kind of uh, have it so that I could turn on or off. Like if I needed to really focus on something, be like, okay, nothing nothing can penetrate this cone of this cone of concentration on whatever it is that I'm doing that needs to be done.
Yeah,
And yeah, that is something that is not necessarily easy to do. And if anything, I've found it. I think I've found it a little more difficult over the years to
Mm.
like maintain that concentration, that really focused concentration, but I managed to get through.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully appreciate the desire to be able to sort of be more sort of focused. One of the reasons I don't like reading novels is
Hmm.
just I can read just fine, but I mean, the slightest thing will distract me. And
Yeah,
then, I mean, it really does take a really amazingly well written novel to suck me into the point where I'm sucked
right.
in,
Yeah.
because even if I'm wearing headphones, anything extraneous will, boom,
I'm sort of the same way when it comes to that. I just don't my the novel. I don't do a lot of reading in books. I do tons of reading all the time about all kinds of subjects online when I want to find the answer to something or get like a or kind of understand more about a certain thing. Like I'll go to a whole bunch of articles and like skim through them and find the important parts and blah blah. I could be really focused in that point. But if you give me a book about whatever it is, I mean, yeah, I might start it. I don't know. It's just it's a totally different thing. Like I when it comes to finding information, I'm so instant gratification now that I don't really usually
Do you
get.
think that's something that's developed over time because we've had technology at our
Yeah,
fingertips for the past 20 years? Or do
yeah,
you think
very
it's
much so.
always been like it?
Yeah, because I'm much less patient with that kind of thing than I used to be. I used to
Oh,
be
okay.
more patient when it comes to reading in long form. I was definitely more patient before, but now I'm less patient. That kind of thing.
Right. So, and again, this is just a bit of fun. You don't have to take it too seriously or think about it too hard, right? So we're gonna have a dinner party with 8 people at the table, you being one. I want you to pick 7 guests. They could be living or dead, and you want to have a fun dinner party.
Fun dinner party.
So that could mean whatever it means for you. I mean, if you want interesting conversations or friction who from history or people who are alive, whatever, would you want to have at this party?
Okay.
You got the Bill and Ted time machine if you need it.
Right, exactly. Got it. So you're bringing back who was it? Oh, Socrates, right? Or Socrates, as they called him in the yeah, I remember that. So yeah, so um hmm, that's a lot of options.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. I know.
So anyone, I would want to bring someone from at least a couple people, probably from maybe one or two people from U.S. politics. I think someone a like a George Washington or Abraham Lincoln kind of thing. I don't think I would bring anyone contemporary. Um, but yeah, maybe those two to start with, and let's see. There would be. Who else would I bring to that party? I don't know. This is a tricky one. Not something I think about very
No,
much.
of course not. It's not. It can't happen. That's why you don't have to think about
Right,
it, because it can't
right,
happen.
exactly. Can't happen. So it's not even. But even among hypotheticals, like some of the other hypotheticals you've asked are things that I have thought about before, but this one is not particularly. Although I've heard the hypothetical before, but so I think Freddie Mercury would be a really interesting person, like from the entertainment world, uh,
Sure.
for music. I think he would be someone fascinating to have at the party. Um, maybe John Lennon. I mean, I'm not like a huge Beatles fan, but I've gained more appreciation for them over the years too. I think that would be interesting.
It'd be interesting to talk to. What do you think John Lennon would have to say to George Washington?
I can find out. I have no idea what they would say. Uh, it's a nice teeth, George.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know what they would have to say to each other, but I'm sure that there would be some fascinating discussions of some sort among those. But sort of like, yeah, I'm only still up to like 4 people, but um But okay, so you got something in the realm of politics, something in the realm of entertainment,
Yeah.
something in the realm of what other realms would there be? Oh, so a
Science,
couple people from my own
civil
past.
rights, whatever,
So,
you could pick anything.
okay, so I have uh, yeah, I know this is going to segue probably into the whole genealogy thing that we'll talk about later, but so I have a great 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 grandfather. One of my great 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 grandfathers died fighting for the Union in Gettysburg, and so it would throw him in there too. I'll see if I can glean anything from his life, or like it, and almost would be as interesting to talk to them about what my life is like and see what their reaction would be to what life is like now compared to what it was then, and bringing somebody back. So hey, why not bring back Socrates, by the way? Why not he can be another one that's on the list. And bring back Leonardo da Vinci as well, because I think he would be able to appreciate a lot, in terms of technology that we have, as he was such a thinker about things.
You
And
need to get them universal translators like on Star Trek, though, so everybody could talk
yeah,
to
you
each other.
probably you probably need something like that. I was assuming since you could bring people back from the dead that
They could just,
you know,
yeah. Why not?
translator is the least of the technical hurdles that you need to do.
All right, so you've got 6 now. You need one more.
Okay. Yeah, we'll bring back.
Oh no, you got 7 because you mentioned your great grandfather. That's 7 then.
Yeah, great 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 grandfather, and then the other. Yeah, so is that 7? Yeah.
Yeah, Lincoln, Washington, Lenin, Mercury, Socrates, Da Vinci, and great 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 grandpa.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Because it's interesting because I've asked people this sort of question for years and years and years, and I always find it interesting because um, oftentimes people seem to pick like 4 people that are basically like red, and the other 4 people are basically like blue. And it's really interesting to me how certain people want to have that. That's what they want. They want to see the sparks, and then other people they want to. I've had people, oh, I want to get the Buddha and Jesus, man, and all that kind of stuff.
No, that's like the last thing. Like I mean, that could be interesting too, but for someone who obviously is an atheist, like I guess it would be interesting to have someone like that there, and talk to them and like figure out like what they really believe about anything, and see if Jesus really does have blue hair and or blue blue eyes and blonde hair, like some people say.
The depictions of Jesus over the years have always amused me because almost none of them sort of like really take into consideration the time
Right.
and place. So it's interesting to me how certainly, especially in later centuries, anglicized the images of Jesus sort of became.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
As with everything else, we like to anglicize it.
Yeah. So you mentioned your great great grandfather, and in a previous stream, we spent some time talking about your passion for your hobby of genealogy and studying your sort of family history. Am I right in thinking it's not just your own family history that interests you, but just like you know that whole subject?
Yes, it's the whole subject, and honestly, and really, the my own family history is of some interest to me, and I've already spent some time researching it, and others have too in my family. And there's not really, there's maybe like a minor mystery here and there from like a few generations back, but nothing like nothing really particularly close to me personally. It is something that interests me, but I'm even more interested in solving other people's mysteries around it. And I've done that on a volunteer basis for the last year and a half for a nonprofit that helps people figure out who their biological parents were when there is a question whether like who they are or if they were adopted or whatever else. So these are Um, I've it's been very rewarding. I've the the gratitude that people show when you solve the mystery for them is really a lot, and it's very rewarding to talk to people that are like, wow, I've wanted to know for like 30 years this, and you figured it out in like a day.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
it's quick, right? Sometimes it only takes me a few hours. Sometimes it'll take me a few weeks or a few months, but
Mhm.
I usually, a lot of times, I can get to the answer. So it's interesting.
That is interesting. And so, what got you into the whole thing in the first place, though? I mean, was there like a did you learn one thing that made you more curious and want to dig in more, or how did it all start?
Yeah, it started with I did 23andMe because I thought, oh, that's cool. I wonder if 23andMe can figure out like what my background is. And 23andMe did a very good job of figuring out that I am in fact, as I already knew, like basically half British descent and then a quarter Swedish and a quarter Finnish. And so it was pretty close to dead on. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. They've even gotten to this level. And that was in 2013. That was like a couple iterations ago of the ethnicity estimates. They're always revising and fine tuning. But
Mm,
what I one of the things that I did is I helped a a friend of mine, his wife, to find out who her parents were. And so that was, and at the time I wasn't skilled enough, and I didn't have hits that were close enough to be able to get it all the way there. But I did give her a lot of information, and she actually was eventually able to figure it out on her own. And then more recently, just a few years ago, I was able to help my cousin help figure it out. His dad was adopted, so on the non on the side that's he was married to my cousin, actually, so
mm.
not a blood relative, and so I figured out basically who his parents were as well. So um, and
Well,
so I
how far back can you reasonably trace, in the absence of like, documentation, just based on uh, 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 what's the word? Genome evidence alone.
so you can go back pretty far. The further back you go, the harder it is, obviously. So
Sure.
you go far back and you can figure out things. It's typically in these cases that I'm working, there are people who are of course alive now, and then they have their parents may or may not be alive. Their parents may have been born as early as like the early 1900s in some cases. So, but you have so many people now that are on Ancestry DNA that you can get really good hits on these people. You can get a lot of hits and sort of triangulate where people are, um,
Hmm.
like which families their parents belonged to, and you can kind of figure out by the marriages and stuff like that, like, oh, they're related to this person, like, oh, but this family and this family had a marriage right here, so now I know that their kid that kid that one of the kids from that marriage is probably their parent. That's how that all works.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I mean, we take for granted, social mobility nowadays because of automobiles and other forms of transportation. But once upon a time, not all that long ago in the span of human history,
Mhm.
people tended to marry the people who were their own age in their local village.
Yes.
I mean, that's, so in a sense, I kind of think that fact makes it easier because,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of social mobility for, compared to now anyway, for most of human history.
Correct.
So,
Yeah,
um,
that's definitely true. And but it doesn't take very many. It doesn't take. There's a lot of family trees that I see where it'll start at a certain point, and then you go up like a level or two, and then you'll end up in a certain state of the country or whatever, and then you go up from there, and like a lot of it will be from that region. And then but now, as you get closer to present day, you get a lot of people that are hopping completely a course across the country.
sure.
There's a lot more of that now. And
Yeah.
also, though, now there are a lot fewer kids on average per family. So that part actually makes it easier because when you have a whole lot of kids to sort through and you're trying to go through each line, it takes a long time. So,
Yeah, well, anatomically modern humans have been on the earth for a minimum of 150,000 years or whatever, 100,000 years. And for most of that time, the previous ice age was still in effect. And so most of the northern hemisphere was under ice glaciers for literally hundreds of centuries before it started to recede, and then mankind came out of Africa and started to spread across the globe. Can they trace that spread in terms, not just the fossil record, but can they use genealogy for that to figure out what the order of that spread was?
yeah, there is quite a bit that they can do with that as well, and part of that also, some of that is related to Neanderthal studies. So there's a certain percentage of your DNA that
4%.
is Neanderthal. So yeah,
Right.
4%, 3%, something like that. It's usually somewhere in that range. And what's interesting is that if you are of 100% African descent, you have most likely 0% Neanderthal DNA. And so there was no. It's all people who had left Africa and went into North
Yeah,
America.
so there must have been some crossbreeding of hominids back before the Neanderthals went fully extinct.
Yes, there definitely was. There was a fair amount of crossbreeding, in fact. And
Well,
so
those Neanderthals must have been pretty sexy with that thick brow,
yeah,
man.
yeah, it must have been, there must have been something about that. They must have brought something to the table. And and so yeah, my percentage of Neanderthal DNA is actually like in the 99th percentile of of people in general. Like it's like 3.8% or something, like 4%. I don't know what it is, but it's so being of entirely Northern European descent, it kind of makes sense, right? That would be the last places that Neanderthals were, I would assume.
Sure.
So it's but that percentage, if you are of European descent, your percentage of Neanderthals is usually going to be somewhere between like 2 and 4%, like depending on
Right.
where you
Yeah,
where you
that's
are.
pretty interesting. I don't know. I just find the whole thing when I think back at human history and how people spread out, and if there wasn't for the fact that we have uh, developed like international travel and international communications, uh, you know, heck, I'm old enough to know about, but I wasn't old enough to travel back then. But I mean, when I was a kid, Earth was lots of different worlds. You know what I mean? It still is I mean, you've been to Asia, so you know that. I mean, it is like a different planet over there.
Oh, it is.
You
Yeah.
know,
Very
but I mean, it was very much more like a different planet, say 100 years ago, when
much
certain areas were still very undeveloped, and certain areas were very sort of much more modern and even overdeveloped. And obviously that world is lost. There's hardly any places now where the modern world hasn't infiltrated and in some way corrupted.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, even in like the interior of New Guinea, people nowadays have, they know what money is now, and then it made them learn what greed is. And all this kind of, you know what I
Right.
mean? It's
Yeah.
like they never had that before. And
Right. Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
It's the different, and it is, yeah, it's very difficult to find a place that is untouched by American culture in a lot of ways too. Like you can go anywhere and hear like American music on the speakers of the mall, the local mall in South Korea or whatever. It's
right.
always you're always
Have you been any place in the Middle East besides Israel?
no, I haven't even been to Israel. I've been to United Arab Emirates.
Oh,
Uh,
UAE. Okay,
I was,
I
I was
thought you
using
went to
Israel as
Israel
an
as well.
example of the
I
old
don't know why I thought you'd been to Israel, but I thought you'd been to Israel.
No, I hadn't. No, sorry. I was referring to that old
That
YouTube.
conversation, though. Yeah, yeah, that's why.
Right. No, I've only been to United Arab Emirates in the Middle East, and I've been there 3 times actually for work.
Is the UAE because I'm not geographically astute necessarily. Is the UAE the one with the city with the giant tower?
Yes. Well, so UAE, so Dubai is one of the provinces of United Arab Emirates.
Right, and that's
So
the city with the big tower.
right.
It's like
That's
half a mile high.
yes. That's the Burj Khalifa. That's the tower, and I've seen that. Yes, it is quite impressive. It's huge. You can see it right from the big mall, the Mall of Arabia or whatever that huge mall is.
You must be able to see it from miles away. I mean, it's, half a mile tall, just beggars belief. I mean, the engineering involved with that is, impressive all by itself.
Yeah, and there's all these levels. Like the top is relatively narrow, but then as you get closer to the base, it gets noticeably bigger. And there's tons of apartments in there and everything. I think there is some residential in there. There's quite a bit of residential, I think, in there as well.
It must cost a fortune to live up in the high apartments up there.
Yeah, it must be. That's got to be pretty wild. But there's a lot of money floating around in the United Arab Emirates. It's an interesting place. Only about 18% of the total resident population of UAE are actual Emiratis, actual citizens. Most of them are foreign workers.
Hang on a minute. 82% of the people there are foreign workers?
Correct.
How does that even work?
So I work. So the company that was a client of ours was they're based in Abu Dhabi, which is another province of United Arab Emirates, and that's also where they have the oil, and that's also where the actual leader of the whole country is. He's the leader of that province and the leader of the whole country. And he's Sheikh Khalifa, I think that's the name of the tower after, etc. So that whole thing is pretty fascinating too, like how that all works with the oil money. But yeah, there's just a ton of money floating around there.
Right. And in the comment section, Vegas mentions that the engineering is impressive, but so is the Philippine slave labor they get away with. I can't speak to that point. I have no education and I've never been there.
I can speak to that actually. So I do know. I know people in the Philippines who have family that are either like in Saudi Arabia or in UAE and that kind of thing. So the UAE does get away with some slave labor for sure. Where that comes in is not it's not like office workers. There's a lot of that as well. There's a lot of people who you would consider like just your standard, analysts and operations people and call center people and all that kind of stuff. And they're treated fine. They get generally a decent wage. And even people that are in hospitality, that work for the nice hotels and everything else like that, they get by at least, and they are usually able to send some money home as well, and they do okay. But where the biggest problems are is with construction, and so they get people from like Bangladesh and places where they're not only third world countries, but they're countries that are like absolutely the poorest of the poor countries. And so people from those countries, yes, they will definitely abuse their labor for sure, and they're not always treated well, and that's definitely a significant human rights problem that they have. The people that I was mostly working with were like office workers who were fairly compensated, and these were people most of them from India, who had university educations and very smart people and knew what they were doing, etc. I worked with a guy also from Bahrain, which is another Arab country.
Do you think places like Dubai, because there is so much money floating around, and people therefore want to stay on their good side, and that's why they get away with these practices, which in other places they might not be allowed?
Yeah, that may be part of it. There's also there's a limited amount that we can do about it, that we can pressure them into it, and they also will make some strides, or at least try to show that they're making strides. I don't know to what extent they really just want the cheapest labor possible, and obviously any situation where there's that kind of thing happening, it's terrible, and we rightly should speak out about it. I don't know to what extent we have control over it or have influence over it. Maybe we may have some influence. I didn't personally see it when I was there, but it's not the kind of thing you'll see, because those people or construction workers are usually housed by the companies in these little, these places which have poor living conditions, as you can imagine.
Once upon a time, in the USA, basically, you know, you could every even small cities have a poor area, right? I mean,
Right.
pretty much every community I've ever been in or lived around near has a poor section of town, and what I completely lost my train of thought. Damn it.
You're
Oh
talking
yeah,
about.
no. What I was going to say was, so once upon a time you could, but once upon a time you could visit America from abroad and go to see like the touristy things, and you completely miss poor people. You would never see the poor people because we managed to tuck that away pretty much in most parts of the country, in most cities. You know, for the most part, in cities that generally get visited by foreigners anyway, right?
Mhm.
And nowadays, not so much. Have you been to San Francisco or Oakland lately?
Um, I've been there. It's been a while, but I've been to both of those places multiple times. Yeah, and I know that there's been, yeah,
It's
there's
it's not invisible anymore, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
right, exactly. Well, and people have, we've also decided that as a country, like there's I think we were much less inhibited in the past about basically telling homeless people to, hey, move it along, you know, you're not welcome here. And so that we could push them to the side, in a place where we could see them. Now also
There's
the
too
problem,
many now.
what was that?
There's too many of them now.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
the problem of homelessness is getting worse all the time. The income inequality in general is getting worse, and that means that there are going to be a lot more homeless people, and it's a huge problem, and it's not being addressed as much as it should. And so a lot of these people that are falling through the cracks, there are more visible because there are a lot more of them, and they are not they're not being moved as aggressively out of public view as they used to be, and for good reason. I don't think it's not it's something that was often done in rural.
I have real strong feelings about stuff like that. I mean, I get really angry when cities have just, ordinances which prohibit homeless people from, you know, I mean, where are they supposed to go? I mean, you know, my whole thing, I'm a big fan of public housing and blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. I don't want to go down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole, but the homelessness is one of my pet peeves, man, you know,
Mhm.
and it's different in different parts of the world because you've traveled quite extensively. And so, you know, I mean, in America, begging has a particularly nasty sort of connotation, at
Yeah.
least before COVID. I think COVID might have softened people's uh, approach toward begging to a certain degree. But I mean, in Asia, or certain parts of Asia, I should say, if it should be more specific, I mean, begging is just seen as a normal, you know, there's always going to be beggars, and they just accept it, and they tend to give beggars, you know, they help beggars out. Do you know what I mean? It's a different attitude to it.
Yeah, there are definitely different views on how bad it is and whether it's acceptable or not, and that changes depending on what country you're from, or what part of the country you're from, or sometimes your political persuasion, of course, is going to color that as well. There are places that have ordinances that try to pass ordinances, as you mentioned, things that are anti-begging, anti-homeless people, anti all that sort of thing. And I could I could almost be okay with some of those things if we actually had a decent social safety net.
Right.
Like,
If there was some place for them to go, that would be one thing.
if it were clear to me at any point that any one of these people could get social services and could make sure that they had a place to live and something to eat, then I'd be like, okay, well, and by the way, healthcare, then yeah, then I could say, okay, well, these people do obviously have that ability, but they're not, and so I could understand the state being, kind of cracking down on them more, but that's clearly far from where we are today. So as
Yeah.
annoying as it is, and as,
Yeah, I don't know. It's that I think the solutions, obviously more available housing is just something that there's not an awful lot of political will for at the moment, anyway.
no,
Listen, I would like to lighten up the questions at the end here, and then hand it over to the audience before we wrap up this interview. Your YouTube channel, Zaunstar,
mhm.
has been going since what, at least 2010 that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so started in late 2009 making videos. Before that, I mean, I had a channel for a few years, but wasn't really trying to do anything with it. But then in late 2009, I started making videos, and Where it really got started was the atheist content. So I did the series How to Argue with a Creationist. And it was a multi-part series, and that kind of got me noticed by various people. And um, so yeah, I was at one time I had over 20,000 subscribers back when that was actually quite a few. But
Sure, yeah.
now it's down to like 16,000 some because I have been much less active the last
Sure,
handful of
sure.
years.
And where did you come up with the whole Crocoduck Army idea?
So it was kind of a way to just take the silliness of the Crocoduck. Like that was kind of that was the you remember Kirk Cameron was
Yeah,
the
yeah, sure, yeah.
came up with the Crocoduck. He went on I think it was the Bill O'Reilly show. And he was like he'll if evolution were true, we should have this a
Right.
crocodile. And he shows like this this silly picture of like a duck with like a crocodile.
Yeah, grafted crocodile face on a duck. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And everybody's like, what? And so it just became, I just thought that, coming up with something like the Crocoduck Army was just a funny thing to come up with as like the totem for people who subscribe to my channel. And
Well, I just have to give you the compliment that I wish I thought of it first.
thanks. Well, it's it was just it was yeah, it was years ago that I came up with that. It was like very early on that I came up with that. And it's really been great because I've met so many people through, including you and so many other people, so many other friends, even people that I have never met in person, also like you. And but that I really valued those friendships and the exchange of ideas and all of that as well. And it's definitely been a it's been a significant part of my life in a lot of ways. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, certainly when I first started on YouTube in 2009, and for that year and all of 2010 and the first part of 2011, it was the main thing in my life.
Mhm.
It was a creative outlet. It was a social opportunity for me as well. And for me personally, just being able to be creative
Mhm.
at that time in my life was something I really needed to be able to do because I just come out of this big heartbreak and everything. And I think there was an awful lot of people that started the same sort of time that I started who were also just coming out of heartbreaks and needed some other focus in their life. It was interesting.
Yeah. It's and it definitely was in that time of my life where I really wanted to get involved in the discussion, and just having this sort of outlet to do it with videos was really fascinating to me. So Dev Shell's question is on start. How are you? I am doing well, thank you, Dev Shell. Dev Shell is one of those that it was one of one friend of mine who I've known since the very early days too. We're friends from like YouTube and Blog TV back in those days, and you remember that
Yeah.
whole and yeah, and he and Peach and we.
Did you ever guest host on the Madness Mayhem and charity thing?
Yes, I did. Yes, a few times I was on that as well, and yeah, I was usually able to raise a good amount during my time. So that was probably that was a lot of those were like sort of during the peak of my popularity, and people were so people would actually come to so I was always happy to get that support
Well,
from
that's cool. Well, because I was in the UK, right? So I got the hours of the day where Americans were mostly not watching or they were mostly asleep. So
yeah.
I was the fill-in guy. I don't know that I raised very much money or helped raise very much money, but it was nice to be included, certainly. And anything that I could do to help that was always cool. And back then
Right.
collaborations were much more of a thing on YouTube than they are now. And once upon a time, I actually had clout. I could say, hey, I want to make a collab video, and people would raise their hand to me. I'd be like, wow,
Yeah.
that's great. Doesn't happen like that anymore. Do you
No.
remember that video we made for Coughlin, roasting Coughlin?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I was part of that video.
You were, yeah.
Yeah, it was so long ago, but yeah, there's always, but yeah, the community that we collectively formed, there were dozens of us who all knew each other. We were all in that same community, and of course, there was always the occasional drama, etc. But it was really a very good community, and still, and a
And
lot of
you've gone to some YouTube events, haven't you? You've met other YouTubers in person. So
Yeah.
have you met Raven and Peach?
I've met Peach, yes.
Okay. Have you met Joe?
Yes, I've met Joe a few times. Yeah, and Joe's been we met up one time also when he was down in the DC area. I think he was in Maryland or something, and I went up to meet him like a handful of years ago. And we met at various some of the skeptic conventions too, like the Amazing Meeting TAM that used to happen. I went to the American Atheist Convention a couple times as well. So
Well, that's
yeah,
pretty cool. Well, hey, man, don't be afraid to name drop. Who did you meet? Have you
well,
met Eric Law?
I did meet James Randi,
Oh, wow.
and so that was cool. At the Amazing Meeting, of course, that was his thing. You know, the James Randi Foundation was his JREF. You know, so I did get to meet him several years ago. Let's see, I saw Dawkins, but I didn't actually meet him. But I do remember that he had security. He had his own personal security details, so it was like interesting. Who else? Other people? I'm not sure that I've met. Penn and Teller. I met both of them near around the same time, but in different. They were individually not. Oh, didn't meet them together, but that was at that was at TAM also because they were friends with James Randi. So, yeah, it has been a trip. All these.
That's cool. Well, hey, I would wind the show down in a second, but before I do that, I'd like to throw out to the people in there's in the side chat there. Can you see the side chat?
I don't have it up, but I can get.
Okay. I mean, basically, I'm going to throw it out there. If anybody in the side chat wants to ask Zaunstar a question, now is the time because we're going to wrap up the show in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So, getting ready for it, working it out. No, anybody, anything, nothing. Raven, surely you've got something you want to know. Some burning curiosity.
Oh wait, and you said, you know what? What's funny is you said, let me see here. Oh, you said for some reason it completely went over my head that like Raven is DevShell. I've known her as DevShell for so long that I forgot for a second that she's Raven. I'm like, well, she's DevShell. She's always been DevShell.
Yeah,
I've always known her by her YouTube name. So
right. So Green Machine would like to hear a crazy travel story.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, there's always weird travel. So in Shanghai in 2017, I was taken for a ride by a guy who was pretending to be a taxi driver. I got to, and I'm a pretty careful traveler, and I know the whole fake taxi scheme. Like I get it. My flight was late coming into Shanghai, so the high-speed train that would normally have taken me to, or actually, I forget, there's a local train, something like that. I got to the end of the high-speed train, but the local lines were already closed, so I couldn't get to my hotel by any other means but a taxi. And so I asked I was looking for it. I was obviously a tourist, with my bags and stuff, and a guy comes up to me, "Hey, you need a taxi?" I'm like, "Yeah, but you're a metered taxi, right?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And then I get to his car. I'm like, wait a minute, this is not a meter taxi. He took my suitcase, put it in the trunk. I'm like, oh shit, this is not gonna end well. So, because I knew immediately like what was that. But the thing is, but he'd already grabbed my suitcase, and so I should have kept hold of my suitcase until we got to the car. But so we get to the hotel, and the guy says he wants the equivalent of he wanted, I forget what he wanted. Yeah, he wanted like $60 or something like that. The ride should have been like 15, right? And I wasn't having it. And I was like, nope, not doing it. And I yelled at him. He like tried to stop like before the hotel and to get me to pay first. And because I think he started to figure out too that I was on to him as well. That it wasn't a real taxi. And So I was like, I pretended to not have enough. I said, oh, I have only this much, but I need to go in to get, to get more. And so I gave him like a little bit more than what it really should have been, but it was not what he was asking me for.
Right,
And
right.
he follows me into the hotel, and I immediately go to the reception desk, and I went behind the reception desk basically, and I said, this guy's pretending he's a taxi driver, and he's trying to rip me off. And they
Yeah,
didn't
there's
really.
lots of those guys in London that do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm sure they do. Yeah, and this guy, yeah, he came, and he was mad. He really tried to. He stayed there for a while and was even talking to they called the security guy. Security guy is Chinese. He comes down, he talks to him back and forth. I kept explaining to the security guy, I'm like, this guy said he was a taxi driver. He's not a taxi driver. He doesn't have a meter. He doesn't, and he's just, and then he talks to the taxi guy, and then he comes back to me and is like, he says, if you just give him like 50 more RMB or 500 more RMB or something, he'll go, or no, 100 or something like that. I don't know. It was the equivalent of like $50. I forget what the conversion is, but I was like, no, absolutely not. He didn't get it. And like, that is very much sort of a Chinese thing too. Like they very much, the whole scam thing, they culturally, like they will very much take the side of the Chinese person in most of these situations, in situations where you would not normally think they would. And in most countries they wouldn't. In China, they will.
Right.
And the general manager of the hotel definitely heard it from me in my comments to him. I said, you got to train your security people better to understand that when there's a scam, that this is not what you do. You don't go back at you're not suddenly like the mediator between
Right, right. Yeah.
just they don't get it. And the guy that was a general manager of the hotel, based on his name, I think he was German, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and I know this is we'll make sure to train them better and that kind of thing. So yeah, scams are a thing. Taxi driver getting a taxi is by far the most risky thing you can do in another country when you're not using an app. If you're just hailing,
Especially if you don't speak the language.
and especially if you don't speak the language, it happens all the time. It has happened to me probably 8 times or so in various ways. This was the most egregious one where he tried to do it, but it's happened several times where they try to extort money or extort in a way like they'll just lie to you and say, oh, is this much or whatever, and not use the meter and all kinds of things. You just have to be really careful. Try to use Uber or something like that. Is there anybody that Zaunstar would like to throw some shade on? Well, if somebody that is sure, I mean, I guess it would have to be somebody that we know, right? So I don't know if any of you have followed the whole Dave Silverman story arc. He used to be the leader of American Atheists. He used to be the president of American Atheists.
I know who he is from that. Now that you mentioned it, I know who he is. Yeah.
Yes, he's the tide goes in, tide goes out guy. Right? He was on Bill O'Reilly. He was the one that O'Reilly was talking to in that whole thing, right? So he's now decided he's now a conservative. He doesn't call himself a conservative, but he does nothing but like basically retweet like Tim Pool and and James Lindsay and all these people that are upset about like CRT, and they're just the most ridiculous people. But
Right.
he is now one of those people. He's basically joined up with who I refer to as like MAGA atheism type groups, and he's very much talks about the woke mob and blah blah blah, because he blames them for canceling him because he had some allegations against him which resulted in him being booted from American Atheists, and there were even lawsuits, and it was a whole big thing. But he's now decided that he's conservative, and I've gone toe to toe with him several times on Twitter about various things, and maybe I'll talk to him on my stream at some point.
Have you met him face to face?
Yes, I've hung out with him before. I've met him a few times, and this was just socially at various events, TAM and various other places. And
So if you do a stream with him, would you be your normal diplomatic self, or would you throw the shade that you really want to throw?
I would be somewhat diplomatic, but a lot of the stuff that he talks about is very much right wing, and he does one of these things which I think is really pretty disingenuous that a lot of conservatives do these days. There are a lot of people, especially like people that aren't necessarily definitely in the political sphere, but there are more like atheism like him. But like they won't say that they're conservative, right? They'll take all of the conservative talking points and run with them, and they'll basically interact with, in a positive way, almost nothing but conservatives and retweet conservatives, etc. And they'll be like, "Oh no, I'm not conservative," because in his case, he'll say, "Well, I'm pro-choice." I'm like, okay, so that makes you automatically not conservative, I guess. Despite all these other things, that doesn't make any sense. But there are a lot of people like this, and Jordan Peterson is like this as well. He's well, I'm not conservative, but I think that that this is a travesty of
I can't stand that guy. My son got into that guy about 6 years ago, and I was like, oh no.
Right.
He's like, no, he really makes a lot of sense. I said, that's the problem. See, the people like Jordan Peterson is a good example of a manifestation that I've noticed over the past 10 years, which is people that they speak a lot of truisms, and then it mix a lot of bullshit in with the truisms. And because you're swallowing the truisms, you swallow the bullshit as well.
Yeah, very much so. And there's this funny comic that was going around about Jordan Peterson. Like, there was this little kid sitting on Jordan Peterson's lap, and the kid was like, Jordan Peterson's teaching me all kinds of really new and innovative ideas like Christian conservatism and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny because that's really what it is. It's just Christian conservatism in a different package,
right?
But not everybody sees that. And if you're young and impressionable and you don't really know the history of anything, and you might see Jordan Peterson like, oh, he's like a father figure,
Well, he has that intellectual vibe, I guess, that some people find appealing. Okay, This is an easy one.
Favorite ice cream is Cherry Garcia. That would be the Ben & Jerry's flavor, Cherry Garcia. And Chunky Monkey would be a close second, and probably chocolate chip cookie dough would be a close third. And mint chocolate chip, too. Throw that in there as well. Those are all good. But I think Cherry Garcia would have to be the top.
Yeah, well, I'm so boring when it comes to ice cream. My favorite flavor is vanilla. I can't help it.
That's almost worse than saying that your superpower should be that no one can tell if you're lying.
I know, right? Anyways, listen, I think it's a good place to wrap up the interview for now. And I want to thank you so much for raising your hand when I suggested this sort of thing, and being one of the first ones out of the gate as well. And I'd also like to thank everybody in the comment section for hanging out with us tonight. And I have another interview with a Breakfast Clubber, or now Dinner Club. I got to get used to it. The Dinner Club. I got another interview tomorrow night with Sue Angel Rider, who's a guest host on the show. And it'll be nice to have Sue on the show, because when she's on the Jamborees, she's far too polite and therefore never gets a chance to speak. So getting her to speak on the channel more openly will be actually a breath of fresh air for Sue, I'm sure. And I'm looking forward to that. So that's tomorrow night. And we've got Bionic Dance on Wednesday and Sword Sage on Friday.
Awesome.
So that's what the audience can look forward to. So say goodbye to everybody in the chat, and we will see you all next time.